I was led into a simple room that looked like an interrogation room. A seemingly gentle police officer motioned for me to sit down.
According to your sister-in-law Brooklyn, the kerosene you gave her was actually gasoline, which caused the kerosene stove to catch fire.
When asked where I stored the kerosene, I explained that I had recently changed the location. About 3 months ago, I noticed an increase in kerosene consumption, so I suspected theft. I moved the kerosene to a locked storage shed and replaced it with gasoline in the storage box. The police officer stared at me intently. It was an unpleasant gaze. Thinking calmly, I began to realize that my actions were indeed strange. If gasoline was placed where kerosene used to be, someone might mistakenly take it.
Excuse me for saying this, but you suspected that Brooklyn was stealing kerosene, didn't you? So you placed gasoline where the kerosene used to be, hoping that something would go wrong, is that correct?
I looked up at the police officer's face. He had a sharp look in his eyes, trying to uncover the truth of the incident, despite his seemingly gentle demeanor. As I struggled to find words, someone came running towards the room we were in.
Elena!
It was my husband, Santiago. He was still in his suit, probably just finished with work. For some reason, he was holding our son Caden's game console. After catching his breath, he spoke clearly and firmly to the 2 police officers.
Elena did nothing wrong. Look at this.
The game console Santiago brought cleared my name. My name is Elena, 41 years old. I live in an old house with my husband Santiago and our 9-year-old son Caden. The house has a small garden, which I really like. Although there are no convenience stores nearby and it's difficult to go to the supermarket without a car, the people in this area are calm and kind, making it a very comfortable place to live. Having my in-laws and sister-in-law Brooklyn living nearby is also reassuring. When our entire family caught the flu when Caden was little, my in-laws came to take care of us. Having reliable relatives nearby is very comforting.
Excuse me, Elena.
Brooklyn called out as she frequently visited my house. Unlike her relatively quiet brother Santiago, Brooklyn had a straightforward personality and spoke her mind clearly, which made me feel uncomfortable at first.
Elena, you need to keep all the windows open. The house needs good ventilation, or it will deteriorate. Besides, no one around here locks their doors, and there's nothing worth stealing anyway.
Brooklyn said nonchalantly as she opened all the windows in the house without asking. Before I got married, I was taught to lock up even if I was just stepping out for a short while, so this was quite a contrast for me. One time, Brooklyn offered to drive Caden and me to the supermarket. As I was about to lock up, she looked at me in disbelief.
Hey, you can't lock the house,
she said. I froze at the front door, holding the key. What? Why? I blurted out.
If someone tries to break in while you're out and finds the door locked, what do you think they'll do? They'll set the house on fire,
she explained. What? Really? I responded, confused.
In this area, we don't lock up. We leave some money in a visible spot,
Brooklyn said proudly.
That way, if a burglar does break in, they'll just take the money and leave quickly.
Still holding the key, I wondered if this was an American thing. After a few seconds of silence, I put the key back in my bag, leaving the house unlocked. I decided to follow Brooklyn's advice in her presence, not wanting to dismiss my sister-in-law's opinion. Despite this, I felt uneasy about not locking the front door. Brooklyn often mocked my carefulness to Caden, calling me overly anxious, which made Caden tease me as well.
Mom, if you lock all the doors, the neighbors will worry.
Caden said, echoing Brooklyn's story about burglars setting fire to locked houses. I sighed. Initially, I appreciated Brooklyn playing with Caden, but seeing him influenced by her words made me feel a bit down. Moreover, Brooklyn had become quite comfortable in our home, and her behavior started to seem a bit presumptuous. One day, Brooklyn took home the meal I had prepared in advance without asking. When I opened the fridge and saw that the food I had stored in a container was gone, I thought maybe Santiago had eaten it as a snack with his drink.
Huh? I didn't eat it. Oh, I saw Brooklyn take something from the fridge when she left earlier.
Hey, you should have told her not to do that.
Well, she's been playing with Caden, so cut her some slack, okay?
I closed the fridge door with a pout. As I washed my hands to start preparing dinner, I suddenly felt the urge to check the bathroom. Huh! The amount of cosmetics I usually use has decreased. The position of my hairbrush had changed, giving the impression that someone had used it. I sighed softly and went back to the kitchen to check the shelf where I stored snacks. The chocolates and potato chips I had bought for Caden were gone. This is a bit much. Muttering to myself, I tried to understand the uneasy feeling welling up inside me. At dusk, I went out to the garden to clear my mind, looking at the red light streaming through the window. In the garden, Caden was engrossed in his game console. Playing games even in the garden. I sighed and watched the sun set behind the mountains. It was beautiful. But after a little more gazing, I had to start preparing dinner.
Mom, look at this.
Caden turned the game console screen towards me, so I turned my back to the sunset. All right, I need to start preparing dinner.
Mom, here. Doesn't this look weird?
I don't understand games. You should study a bit before dinner. Caden, still holding the game console, pouted and dropped his shoulders. Leaving him there, I went back to the kitchen. Ah, no good. I still feel this uneasy lump in my chest. I took a deep breath and pulled out my smartphone to send a message to my mother-in-law. I started by expressing my gratitude for Brooklyn taking care of Caden at our house. Then, I sent a message asking her to stop using or taking things from our house without permission. After a while, my mother-in-law called me.
I'm sorry, Elena. I'll subtly let Brooklyn know. I'll make sure she doesn't get a bad impression of you.
My mother-in-law is truly a wonderful person who can be so considerate. From that day on, Brooklyn continued to visit our house and play with Caden as usual, but she stopped using or taking things from our house without permission. I didn't know how my mother-in-law conveyed the message, but I was deeply relieved that the issue was resolved without any awkwardness. After this matter was peacefully resolved, another problem arose in our house the following Sunday. At night, after Caden had fallen asleep, I was doing the household accounts and noticed that the kerosene expenses had increased. even though it had gotten a bit warmer recently and we were using the kerosene heater less frequently. Flipping through the pages of the household account book, I saw that the price had suddenly increased from 3 months ago. Come to think of it, Santiago had been frequently going to the gas station to buy kerosene recently. Just then, Santiago came out of the bath and entered the living room. I handed him the household account book as he sat down across the table and was about to drink a can of beer. Recently, the kerosene expenses for the house have been abnormally high. It's been like this for 3 months.
Huh? Oh, you're right. I don't feel like we've been using that much, but now that you mention it, I did notice that the kerosene stored outside has been depleting quickly.
I felt a bit uneasy. In our house, we stored kerosene next to the garbage disposal area, a little away from the entrance. Although it was kept in a storage box, it wasn't locked. Even though it was within our property, anyone could take it, so I felt a bit uneasy thinking that maybe a neighbor was stealing it.
Well, we don't know who might be stealing it, but let's stop storing it outside. The shed has a shutter, and although it's a bit of a hassle, it would be safer to store it there.
It felt a bit wasteful to have an empty storage box that we had bought. It's a bit of a hassle, but we have no choice. How about we put the gasoline we use for the lawnmower in the storage box?
I see. That would be convenient for when I do yard work. Let's do that.
The can with the gasoline is clearly labeled gasoline, so if someone is only stealing kerosene, they won't take it, right?
Well, if they start stealing the gasoline too, we'll deal with it then.
Santiago smiled and took a big gulp of his beer. 2 days later, when I returned home from my part-time job, I was met with an unexpected sight at the entrance. There stood Caden with a troubled expression and a police officer. Instinctively, I thought, Caden must have done something. And, pale-faced, I got off my bicycle and cautiously approached. I immediately greeted the police officer. The officer, who seemed gentle, confirmed my identity and then, with a serious expression, said,
Please accompany us to the station.
What? Did Caden do something wrong? The officer replied,
No, it's you, Elena, who we need to accompany us. We'll explain the details at the station.
I told Caden, who was looking at me anxiously, I'll contact Santiago to come home soon. And then I was taken to the police station in a patrol car. Upon arriving at the police station, I felt a tense atmosphere. I was led to a simple room that looked like an interrogation room. The gentle-looking officer asked me to sit down and slowly began to explain the situation.
Do you know Brooklyn?
Yes, of course. She's my husband's sister.
Actually, this morning, there was a fire at Brooklyn's house. The doghouse outside caught fire.
I listened to the officer's story with my head tilted. To summarize, there was a small doghouse in Brooklyn's yard, and it caught fire while being heated with a kerosene stove. A neighbor noticed the fire and evacuated the dog, but the doghouse was completely burned down. The doghouse was in the shade, so it was cold, and they had taken the kerosene stove from inside the house to warm the doghouse. I felt a slight headache. If the dog outside was cold, why not keep it inside the house during the cold season instead of using a kerosene stove outside? Well, that might be a matter of the owner's perspective, but what puzzled me was why I was contacted about the fire caused by the kerosene stove. The gentle-looking officer, with a troubled expression, said,
Brooklyn mentioned that she called you several times. Haven't you heard?
I took out my smartphone from my bag and saw numerous missed calls from Brooklyn. I hadn't noticed because it was on silent mode, but there were also several voicemail messages. After informing the officer in front of me, I played the voicemail messages, and a loud angry voice echoed in the interrogation room.
How dare you deceive me? It's your fault the doghouse burned down. I'll make sure you take responsibility.
Hearing Brooklyn's angry voice from the phone speaker, I stiffened, but I couldn't ignore the part where she accused me of deceiving her. As soon as I turned to face the police officer, he opened his notebook and began to explain calmly.
According to Brooklyn, the kerosene you gave her was actually gasoline, which caused the kerosene stove to catch fire.
He said,
No! I never gave Brooklyn either kerosene or gasoline.
I exclaimed. The police officer, still looking calm, furrowed his brow slightly as he stared at his notebook. He seemed to be considering that one of us must be lying since our stories didn't match. When asked where I stored the kerosene, I explained that I had recently changed the location and put a can of gasoline in the storage box instead.
I see. And why did you do that?
The officer asked.
About 3 months ago, I noticed an increase in kerosene consumption, so I suspected theft. I moved the kerosene to a locked warehouse and replaced it with gasoline in the storage box.
I explained.
So, someone was stealing the kerosene, and you replaced it with gasoline in that spot, is that correct?
The officer clarified.
Yes,
I replied, feeling his intense gaze on me. It was an uncomfortable look. Thinking it over calmly, I realized that my actions might indeed have been strange. Regardless of who was stealing the kerosene, if gasoline was placed where the kerosene used to be, someone might mistakenly take it. Although the containers for kerosene and gasoline are clearly different, if the storage box only had kerosene before, it's not impossible for someone to make a mistake. The officer continued.
Forgive me for saying this, but you suspected Brooklyn of stealing the kerosene, so you placed gasoline there, hoping something would go wrong?
I looked up at the officer in surprise. He had a sharp look in his eyes, determined to uncover the truth of the incident. As I struggled to find words, someone came running towards our room. The door was flung open, and it was Brooklyn.
Excuse me. I'm in the middle of questioning Elena.
The officer said.
You! Don't try to weasel out of this. The kerosene I got from your house caused the fire. You didn't even answer your phone. You'll pay for this.
Brooklyn shouted, ignoring the officer's attempts to stop her.
I never gave you any kerosene, Brooklyn, and I didn't know you were the one stealing it.
I retorted.
Stealing? That's a terrible thing to say. I was just taking a little kerosene from a relative's house. Why should I be accused of stealing?
Brooklyn said, crossing her arms and raising her chin confidently.
In fact, placing gasoline where the kerosene used to be is a far more malicious act, don't you think?
She added. The officer, deep in thought, suggested.
In such cases, it might be best for both parties to consult with lawyers.
Brooklyn made a face of disgust.
Lawyers? That's a waste of money. If you pay $10,000 for the doghouse repairs and compensation, I won't make a big deal out of this.
What? $10,000? I exclaimed.
Yes! We were lucky the neighbors saved the dog, but we could have lost our family. That amount of compensation is only fair.
Brooklyn insisted. As Brooklyn looked down at me with her arms crossed and a slight smirk, the interrogation room door burst open again.
Elena!
Santiago appeared in the room with another police officer. He was still in his suit from work, holding Caden's game console in his hand. He must have run here, as he was sweating and out of breath. After catching his breath, he spoke clearly and earnestly to the two police officers.
My wife did nothing wrong. Please look at this.
He inserted a memory card from the game console into a computer provided by the other officer. The screen displayed a series of dates, along with numerous photos and videos. Some of the photos were of poor quality, clearly taken with Caden's game console. They showed flowers in the garden, the sky, and candid shots of me walking in the garden. Santiago played one of the videos. There was no sound, and the footage was shaky, as if it had been secretly filmed through a gap in the curtains. It showed the area around the storage box containing kerosene. It was slightly dark, probably evening. At that time, I was usually in the kitchen preparing dinner, so I had no idea what Caden was doing. I assumed he was playing with his game console, but what was he filming? In the video, a figure appeared, looking around nervously. They were holding a small kerosene tank and quickly transferred the kerosene from the storage box into their own tank. I couldn't help but gasp. The person was unmistakably Brooklyn. Brooklyn covered her mouth with her hand as she watched the screen.
Wait a minute. Yes, I took the kerosene without permission. But we're family, aren't we? A little bit shouldn't be a problem. The real issue is that you replaced the kerosene with gasoline.
I see. So, Brooklyn was stealing the kerosene. However, the current issue is who is responsible for her mistakenly using gasoline.
Please watch this video as well. This was taken 2 days before the doghouse fire, after I heard about the kerosene thefts. I secretly installed a surveillance camera without telling my wife.
This video was clearer than the previous one. It showed Brooklyn opening the storage box and transferring gasoline from a metal can to a plastic tank. She did this with practiced ease.
Look here! Pay close attention.
He paused the video and zoomed in on the can Brooklyn was handling. It was clearly labeled in large letters. Caution. Gasoline.
If necessary, I can bring the actual can. The label is much larger and clearer than usual. I made the label myself.
But I accidentally put it in.
The gasoline can is metal and clearly labeled. Brooklyn was in such a hurry to steal someone else's property that she didn't check properly.
I wasn't in a hurry.
The containers for kerosene and gasoline are completely different. Normally, you wouldn't mix them up. Brooklyn uses a can for refueling the lawnmower at home, so she can't claim ignorance.
The officer reviewed the video and nodded deeply.
Thank you.
He said. Having seen the videos, It was clear who was at fault. The officer seemed to have no more to say. He took a brief statement about the fire and told us we could go home, as it was a family matter. Thanks to Santiago's calm actions, it was concluded that the cause of the fire was Brooklyn's own fault. However, we reflected on the fact that it was wrong to leave gasoline in a place accessible to anyone and not lock it up. Regarding this incident, Brooklyn's lies were exposed, and it was revealed that she had been stealing kerosene, leading to discussions about whether to file a police report. Santiago's mother desperately apologized to us.
I'm truly sorry. I'm really, really sorry.
Please don't apologize so much. I'm the one at fault.
The two of them desperately apologized in front of our house on Sunday morning. Seeing her mother apologize on her behalf, Brooklyn seemed to feel something. She stood next to her mother, tears in her eyes, and apologized to Santiago and me.
Raise your faces. Mom. Brooklyn.
At Santiago's gentle words, both his mother and Brooklyn looked slightly relieved and raised their faces.
I don't care if you stole kerosene or whatever. This is the countryside, and people who steal are doing it because they're in need. I can understand that.
Yes, that's right. I couldn't say that I was in need.
But you were planning to blame Elena for mistaking kerosene for gasoline, weren't you? Don't mess with me. You're not just a thief but a fraud too.
I was surprised to see the usually gentle and mild Santiago so angry and tried to stop him.
That's enough.
Brooklyn is reflecting on her actions.
I will never forgive you. Don't ever show your face in front of me again.
Brooklyn quietly said to me.
I'm sorry.
I didn't miss the slight tear in Santiago's eyes as he watched the two of them continue to apologize. I thought Santiago wasn't really angry. Of course, he was probably outraged that she tried to make me the perpetrator, but I didn't think he was so furious as to hurl such harsh words. But he got angry for me. In front of his mother and sister, when I couldn't say anything, he got angry on my behalf, including the amount of anger I should have felt. I felt a deep affection for Santiago, who wasn't used to getting angry. It seems Brooklyn had a hobby of going to gambling places for a long time and was saving money by acting brazenly at our house. I realized this after the kerosene incident, but now that I think about it, Brooklyn often took our food and frequently took our stock of toilet paper and soap. After we stopped inviting Brooklyn to our house, I checked the household budget a while later and was astonished to see how different the consumption of consumables was. My insensitivity to not notice this might have been the reason Brooklyn got carried away. As I muttered self-deprecatingly while looking at the household budget, Santiago, who had just come out of the bath and was drying his hair with a towel, said,
Insensitive or not, the one who stole is at fault. We should reflect on our negligence and security, thinking there were no bad people in the countryside.
After that, Brooklyn's family had a huge argument about the incident, leading to her divorce. Even so, she couldn't stop going to gambling places and was living alone in an apartment, working hard to earn money to go there, so no one could complain. A few months after the incident, our lives were returning to normal. While I was weeding the garden, Caden was looking at the scenery with a digital camera.
Mom, look at this.
I had always misunderstood that Caden was just a kid who played games all the time, but he was always playing with the camera function of his game console, and when I bought him a digital camera, his interest shifted to photography. He started to care about the composition of the photos, and eventually, he said,
I want to become a professional photographer.
A kid who always played games wants to be a photographer.
Games are fun too. But now, taking photos is fun. I always want to do something fun.
Caden seemed to take pride in the fact that his actions ultimately saved me. He showed me the screen of the camera again, saying,
Look, look.
Thinking that I might have prevented this incident if I had listened to Caden earlier made me feel a bit regretful. From now on, I want to discuss security measures thoroughly with Santiago. We decided to be thorough in locking doors and windows, which we had been doing casually until now. As a result of this incident, we shouldn't lower our security awareness just because it's the countryside or because it's peaceful. I love this place. It's quiet, beautiful, and everyone is nice. Even now, I think there are no burglars in such a countryside. Caden looked up at my face silently while holding the digital camera. That's why I think that by having a proper sense of security, others might follow suit, and this town will become an even safer place. As soon as I finished saying that, Caden took a picture of me with the digital camera. When I asked to see the photo, I saw myself with a strangely smug face. Well, it's fine. I'm educating my son to have a higher sense of security. Our laughter echoed in my beloved garden.
How did you like this story? Please subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.